Hey everyone, we are going to do some really quick notes on the Russian revolutions that happened and the rise of the USSR. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today, just a few notes that we want you guys to have down. First of all, we want to understand kind of the transition and the end of the Romanov dynasty. Tsar Nicholas II in 1894 came to the throne, and he will be the last Tsar in Russia. He was a very harsh and weak ruler. He is going to lead Russia back, when we covered this last time, into the Russo-Japanese War, which they lost, and as they're kind of trying to be expansionists. He's also going to bring Russia into World War I, which became very unpopular. And so there he is, right there. Also, here's just a little bit of him and his family, looking very modern otherwise. And so just a little bit about the Russo-Japanese War that happened in 1904. It's a dispute over Manchuria with Japan, and so they fought over that. They did not win, and it basically shook the national confidence of people in Russian progress and the rule of the Tsar. Bloody Sunday is going to be a key event that happened in 1905, not to be confused with Bloody Sunday that U2 and Bono sings about, which would be more England and the Irish and stuff like that. But this Bloody Sunday in 1905 happened when unarmed demonstrators marched to present a petition to Tsar Nicholas II, basically wanting reforms. He wanted, for both workers and peasants, things were not going well in Russia. They really were losing faith in the Tsar. And what happened is that the Russian soldiers ended up firing on the protesters, killing and wounding hundreds of people, which then led to more strikes and riots that broke out. At the end of the day, this was known as Bloody Sunday because it happened on a Sunday. But then kind of Nicholas's answer to this is basically we can form different Dumas. A Duma is a representative assembly, and this will morph into government today, known as the Duma in Russia. But just so you guys know a little bit, this is kind of how it's happened, and that was the response to form the Dumas as ways that people have representation, so we don't have another event like this. Russia in World War I, we know that they were involved. We know when we talked about Pan-Slavism, Russia steps in after to kind of defend Serbia, who, once again, we talked about that last unit. So Russia steps in to back Serbia and declares war on Austria-Hungary. And so war was very unpopular to the Russian people because of rationing and because of the people fighting in the war. It led to starvation of many people that were living in Russia. And so it wasn't very popular. They did not want to be in the war, and they were losing a lot of people within the war as well. There he is again, very smooth. You can see lots of medals, lots of adornment happening there. And so this leads us to the February Revolution, which is really interesting because it actually happens in March, but they were using the Julian calendar. It's a Roman calendar, and so it's known as the February Revolution in 1917, still during World War I. In 1917, protests spread throughout St. Petersburg, and the royal palace is taken over. And this is when Tsar Nicholas II abdicates the throne, steps down. And this will mark the end of the Romanov dynasty, which we started way before Peter, etc. Like, this has been the whole thing. It's always been the Romanovs. So there's only, for all kind of Russian monarchies, it's always been within families, and so there have really only been a few dynasties, and the Romanovs came to an end when Tsar Nicholas II gave up the throne. They set up a provisional government known as the Duma, and Alexander Kerensky takes control of the Duma. So this is like the provisional government, which is not going to be around for much longer. The provisional government was unpopular, and it decided to stay in World War I, which is not what the people wanted. Which, guess what, is going to lead to the October Revolution. This is really interesting. So in 1917, later that year, so we have the February Revolution in March, and then the October Revolution happens where it's led by Lenin. Lenin was actually kicked out of the country, and the Germans actually sent him back, which kind of makes it funny, like kind of a secret train. They send Lenin back to Russia, which to them is a good thing because people in the Russia wanted to be out of the war, and Germany, obviously, since they were being fought by the Russians, wanted them out of the war, and so Germans actually helped send Lenin back. And so here we have led by Vladimir Lenin, leads the Bolsheviks in this revolution with their slogan, peace, land, and bread. They won support of the people, peasants, and the working classes. And the party message that he really had was we need to end involvement in the Great War. We need to kind of take care of peasants. We need to make sure that workers are treated well in factories. And there should be self-determination for non-Russian nationals. And so we see we knew and we've talked about how diverse Russia was, and there were lots of different nationalities that didn't have their own countries. And so we see when he gets into control, eventually we're going to move into the Soviet Union, the USSR. And so each of these little nations became kind of their own states within the grand Soviet Union. So that was the October Revolution that brought him into control. We see just some of the pictures from this. In 1918, they pull out of World War I. The Brest-Litovsk. I am just slaughtering that right now. I'm trying to cruise really quick. I'm sorry for you guys. But they end the war. They pull out. They make this treaty with Germany, and they are no longer involved in World War I. Civil war then breaks out with Lenin and others, and we have the Bolshevik Red Army, which is Lenin and his people, versus the White Army. And so they had the Red Terror campaign. They arrested, tried, and killed many anti-communists known as Whites, which is the White Army. Allies actually fought on the side of the Whites. And so here we go, lots of going back and forth between the Bolsheviks and the White Army. Civil war that lasted for about 3 years. The Red Army actually ends up killing Nicholas II and his entire family to ensure that the Romanovs would never come back to power. And through the entire Civil War, 10 million people about lost their lives through fighting, starvation, or disease. And so a lot's going on during this revolution of the Civil War. At the end, Lenin is successful with the Bolsheviks, and so they kind of instated what they called war communism. It's kind of this period of time where they end private property, they have Russia take control of the banks and industry. Monasteries, churches, and banks all became government property. Food from peasants, they used those to feed urban populations in the cities. And then industrial production actually plummeted and went down during this time, which is unfortunate as they started taking control. They weren't really actually put together to start ruling the country, but they were able to overthrow the provisional government, win the Civil War, and then they were kind of like, oh, we got to have a plan. And so Lenin's kind of, during his rule, starting in 1921, he came out with the different economic reforms, including the New Economic Policy, the NEP, where he restored partial market economy. So they moved away from more of a socialist communist where the government controlled everything and restored partial market economy. The government still controlled the banks and industry. Peasants could now sell surplus for money, and they focused on people going to school for technical jobs so they could help increase industry. Otherwise, the Bolshevik Party became the Communist Party. Russia became part of the ultimate United Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. And they moved the capital to Moscow. So lots of things are happening during Lenin's reign. Lenin will eventually suffer from 3 strokes and eventually dies in 1924. You can actually go and see his body today, and this is him dead, which I said he kind of looks just the same, even though he died. So there's a little bit about Lenin. And then Stalin's rise to power happened after Lenin dies. There's a power vacuum. It was between Trotsky and Stalin for control. Stalin ultimately wins out, and he had to decide how he'll maintain power within the Soviet Union. And so he decides to create a totalitarian state. So he has total control over the state, which many people could say looked a lot like fascism, but in a different way because they accepted communism, which many fascists were against. So, but in many ways, what it looks like, very violent, not a lot of freedoms. It was definitely a totalitarian state. There is good old Stalin right there. Maybe, Columbus, can you read this? Because I cannot. Let me know. Stalin's rise to power. So the first 5-year plan is what he came up with, and there were other 5-year plans that came after this. He really focused on socialism in one country. He was only concerned about his own country. They wanted to catch up, become an industrialized society, and they also worked a lot on collectivization of agriculture. And the goals that they had for collectivization, where they kind of brought all the land together, where we worked together in these different farms, where we do this in this way, had really, really high goals that were not very attainable, and they never actually were attained, even though they a lot of times said that they were. And so that's Stalin. And so he had other 5-year plans. This replaces the NEP, made some people very unhappy because some people actually worked and made some money under Lenin's plan where they could sell their surpluses. And so now you couldn't have that under Stalin. And then maybe one of the most things that Stalin is known for is the Great Purge or the Terror, where he will target anyone who is against basically a dissenter of him, of the government, etc. And so if you were that, you could be killed or you'd be sent off to labor camps known as gulags. So that's a good term for you to know there. The USSR then fought in World War II on the side of the Allies. They'll eventually capture Poland and ultimately Berlin. Stalin was, like we said, a totalitarian ruler. He censored a lot of things. He killed a lot of people. He is often branded as one of the most evil leaders within history. So just so you know a little bit about Stalin, and there he is in modern pictures. So just wanted to kind of catch you up on what was going on, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. So this is kind of the big picture, so you know some of the major notes, but we will talk more about this in class tomorrow. Hopefully this helps you out as we look kind of through the history and kind of catching you up with what's been going on within the country of Russia, which will turn into the Soviet Union throughout World War I, World War II, and then we'll be moving. Stalin will be in control within the Soviet Union when World War II ends, and he's going to be in control as we kind of start the Cold War as kind of one of the two great superpowers. So we're moving into that, but wanted to give you the background and how they came into control. So have a good one.